Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you, your buddy Dave. Hi, I'm Dave, and I'm glad to be here with you on the How to Podcast series. Was that a double intro? Did I just do a double intro? Tell him what he's won, Dave. Anyways, I wanted to talk to you today about podcast titles, and in our meetups we have on Tuesdays and Saturdays right now, currently, we have some of the most amazingly smart and talented people in the world who have podcasts, who come and join us on our meetups. And the only thing missing from our meetups is you, and we'd love to have you there. But one of our great contributors in our meetup, his name is Flavian. Flavian, hi. Flavian is a super amazing, smart guy. And when he speaks, everyone listens because that's what he does. He's a journalist, and he brought up we were talking about podcast titles on our meetup, and he brought up this acronym that I wanted to expound on here on the podcast and add my thoughts to what he provided to us as a framework for a great podcast title. And the acronym is the letter A, the letter I, the letter D, and the letter A, AIDA, AIDA. Now, if you want to know what AIDA stands for, then you better not leave. You better put your phone in your pocket, and you better listen up, because we're going to talk about how to make your podcast titles better using the AIDA formula that Flavian brought up in a recent meetup group that we have for the How to Podcast series. A lot to unpack here, and we're going to get into AIDA in a big way. So stick around. Here we go. So who doesn't love a good acronym, right? Like, you get up in the morning, you're like, stretch, you're like, yawn, and you're like, oh, I could really use a good acronym today, right? Before I get my coffee or have my shower, I need an acronym. I need like letters that mean something. And I'm like, well, how about we do a podcast to help you with that so you can get on with your day? So if that's you, before you jump in the shower, before you pour that coffee, I want you to understand what AIDA stands for. Okay? It's a great acronym. It's going to help you with your titles. You're going to get better titles, and it's going to help you to connect better with your audience and maybe even be found, which would be helpful, right, for a podcast. We're going to adapt the AIDA formula that's used in journalism and adapt it to podcasting so you can do better titles for your show. Now, what does AIDA stand for, Dave? You got me on the edge of my seat. Okay, here we go. So it's AIDA, okay? Attention is the A, interest is the I, desire is the D, and action is the A. AIDA. And again, Flavian brought this up in the meetup. Great, I love it. And this is what he uses as he writes, as a journalist. So our podcast titles can be significantly enhanced and be more effective by just implementing AIDA as we title our shows. Okay, so let's talk about the first one, attention, and how this relates to podcast titles. Here we go. When we talk about attention, which is the A in AIDA, the first A, we're talking about grabbing people's attention. Okay, now, when we would buy newspapers back in the day, there would be somebody standing out on the street corner trying to convince us to buy this newspaper, and they would yell at you. Imagine that. People yelling at you to buy a newspaper. Well, it's kind of sounded like this.
Read all about it. Latest football scores. Morning paper. Morning Star. Paper, mister?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I'll take one. So we could have somebody barking at us on the street to buy this newspaper. And it seems weird now because we don't even really use newspapers anymore. Well, that's changed, right? So, but we want to grab people's attention. And whether it's barking at you on the street to buy a newspaper, we want to do something with our titles that grabs the attention of people. When you're fighting for people's attention, people are being inundated with goofy cat videos and TikTok dances and the news and weather and sports and Netflix and YouTube and everything, right? How do we get the attention of our audience with the title of our show? we need to use some power words in the title of our episodes. Now, these are attention-grabbing words like exclusive or breaking or shocking. These will help to capture interest and get people to kind of go, wait, what's this? As well, we need to ask some intriguing questions. Start with a thought-provoking question that relates to the episode content. Questions are great because people generally search in the form of questions. And it's also how you participate in the game show Jeopardy! You want to employ questions in the titles of your episode. Not just the answer, but the question. Because that also will assist you in your podcast potentially being found by somebody. Pose the question and then go through and use your podcast to address and unpack the question. And as well, employ numbers. Begin titles with numbers to suggest a structured, easy to digest format. For example, for attention would be this would be a good example. 5 shocking truths about sleep you never knew. Okay, well, that would make me go, well, I'm tired and I want to go to sleep and I just lay in bed and stare at the ceiling. Maybe one of these 5 shocking truths about sleep is going to help me fall asleep tonight. So I might press play on that. I might read that blog. I might whatever. So use something that captures people's attention. That's probably the first part of AIDA is all around attention and something that you need to put into your next episode title. The next one in AIDA, the letter I, stands for interest. So what I find interesting is things that interest me, which is kind of how that works. We need to have some kind of highlighting some kind of unique angle for the presentation, what we're talking about on our show, and present our topic in an unexpected or novel way with a different perspective than maybe is traditional for our content and what everybody else is doing in the space. We can incorporate some current trends. We can reference popular topics or current events to make the content feel timely and relevant. Now remember, though, if you go too far on that, your podcast becomes less evergreen because it's not relevant 6 years from now. It could be old news by then. So you want to be a little careful how far you want to go with that, and you can play with these. But definitely try to bring in something that is on trend and happening in the space. As well, you want to use descriptive language. Choose vivid, specific words that paint a clear picture of what listeners can expect from your podcast episode. So a good example of this would be the hidden link between coffee and productivity in the office. Okay, well, that's interesting. I'd read that on the way to work if I'm on the train or on the bus. Something of interest, something that stands out to the listener, to your audience. Okay? And then the D in AIDA is desire. So desire is all wrapped around answering a question for somebody. So somebody's seeking for information, they're seeking for advice, resources, confirmation that they're on the right path. There's something they're seeking. And to them, it could be a pain point, could be an interest, could be a curiosity. But we need to, in our podcast titles, we need to mention some common problems or challenges that our audience may be facing and how our content's going to help them with that. And then we can also promise some benefits to why this episode is going to help them because we know what they're struggling with. So we can clearly state what value the listeners will gain from this episode in particular. And also create some of that FOMO, that fear of missing out. Again, acronyms galore here, everybody. We want to create something that's time-based and exclusive and something that you want people to act now. Let's go forward and be that resource in that moment of time when somebody is searching for the answer to a question or something that they're looking to solve. So an example of desire-based title could be Master Public Speaking in 30 Minutes. Career-changing tips from a TED Talk coach. Cool. So it's got TED Talk in there. It's got public speaking. It's got 30 minutes. It's career changing. There's a lot of things going on in that title that speak to the desire of somebody searching for the answer to something, which is going to help you to be found. The last part of AIDA is all around action. When we talk about action, we're talking about action words. And for those who went and studied English in high school, what's an action word? That would be a verb. Begin or end your title with strong verbs that encourage listening. Also imply the immediacy. Suggest that the information that is something listeners can apply right away. You're not going to have to wait or go to school or download something. It's something they can do right now by listening to your show. And then create some sort of sense of exclusivity. Make listeners feel like they're part of a select group by tuning in and taking action based on the podcast, based on the topic, and based on what you're providing in the episode. So a great example of an action-based title could be something like, Transform Your Finances Today, Insider Secrets from Wall Street. So they can do something right away with the information. They're not going to have to sit on this. By applying these AIDA principles to your podcast episode titles, you can create more engaging, click-worthy titles that can attract listeners and give them compelling reason to tune in. A reminder, though, to keep your titles concise, authentic to your content and to your voice, who you are, and align with your overall podcast brand. I know a lot of people love AI to generate titles for their podcast, but even then, even when you're using these great tools, and they're going to get better and better as we go, remember that they're not always writing in your style, in the way you would talk. So you want there to be a cohesiveness between the title of the episode and how you speak. So I would suggest, if you're going to use AI, great, but just make sure that you're putting it into your own terminology, into your own speech patterns, how you show up, so that when you read the title of your episode on the podcast, it sounds like you. It doesn't sound like somebody generated it for you. And one other side thing about titles. Now, if you have many episodes, like this podcast has at this point 357 episodes, plus all the daily Daves and all the other things we do in the background, there's a lot of episodes of the How to Podcast series. If I go back to episode 1 to episode 50 and look back at my titles and go, it could have been better, I can go into my hosting site, go into edit the episode, and without changing anything and without affecting how it works for my audience, even though the majority of my audience has already heard this episode, and many of them won't go back to episode 1 to 50, I could still go in and tweak those titles and just save it without uploading a new audio, without uploading a new copy of the episode and re-releasing it. No, I can just go in and play with the titles anytime I want and adjust it to see if I get a little bit of a hit. And it works. Sometimes your titles are too short. I worked with one podcaster and they had 1- and 2-word titles for their episodes, like healthcare or finances. That was the title of the episode. Finances. Okay, well, what do you mean? What finances? Who? Personal, business? What? So you want to have a little bit more information there as you can. You want to give as much opportunity for the search engines to find your stuff and to give people an idea if they want to press play on your episode. So 1-word, 2-word titles, not great. You don't need to put the title of your podcast in the episode titles. You don't need that because people already know based on the artwork, based on the title of the podcast itself. So duplicating the title of your podcast in the episode title, it's probably not a good idea. You're taking up a lot of characters that could be used for something else. Let the title of your podcast speak for itself. When you're using those titles, make them relevant. And if you make a promise in the title, be sure to answer it and solve it and address it in the podcast. This whole bait and switch thing where you say you're going to tell me something and you don't, that really kind of wears on people, and people will stop coming to you if you can't provide what you said you were going to provide in the episode. So be truthful and go to the content that people are looking in it for the answer for. It's in the title. It should be in the show. Keep that in mind as you create your podcast. Be sure to leverage that episode title to the best of your ability. And if you're going to do your titles in your audio podcast, remember, if you're connecting your podcast or posting your podcast to YouTube, that the title field in YouTube at the time of recording this is 100 characters, which includes spaces, dashes, dots, numbers. And I find it's very difficult to get a full book title, author name, context, question, topic, everything in a title with 100 characters. So I purposely leave out my episode numbers on YouTube. I don't see them giving me any benefit or bonus. YouTube is really easy to search. So a guest name, a topic, very easy to find something about golf, anything like that. So use the searchability of YouTube. It's very good. It's very strong. And maybe leave out the episode numbers on YouTube. Because again, you only have 100 characters. Try to use every character space you can and make your episode titles count. That's going to help your podcast grow because people know what you're talking about on your show. And that'll make somebody looking at your episode going, do I want to listen to this or not? Your episode title is your first example and hook and bait for somebody to take a bite into your podcast. So make it a juicy one. Give them something to chew on so that when they come to your podcast, they get hooked and then they stay. Okay. Thanks for listening to the show. And if you need help with your episode titles, you're like, I wish there was somebody that I could bounce these episode titles off of and see if I'm on the right path. Well, you have two options. You can come see me personally, and there's a link in the show notes into my calendar for just you and me to get together. We'll talk about show notes. We'll talk about episode titles, your podcast name, artwork, your website, your recording, your interviewing, any of that stuff. That's there for you anytime. It's free. As well, if you want to do this in more of a group setting, then come to our meetups, which happen every single Saturday. And now we've added some Tuesdays as well to try that out. We would love to have you come to a free meetup with other podcasters and ask them and get the group's opinion on maybe your podcast and learn from the group that have assembled together, including Flavian, again, who brought up the AIDA principle for our podcast titles. So apply AIDA to your show. Tell me how it went. I'd love to hear at howtopodcast.ca. Thanks for listening. Get you on the next episode. Make sure your next episode title is better than the last time you did it. And use the AIDA principle. All the information in the show notes. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Keep being you. Keep recording. We need your voice. There's only one you in this world. Thanks for listening. So I get asked quite often, usually at the end of a podcast, like right now, Dave, how can we help you? Like, how can we, as a listener, support the show? Can we come rake your leaves? Can we cut the grass? Shovel the snow? Watch your dog? Help you move? What can we do? Clean your dishes? Oh, that'd be interesting. Well, if you can't do that because, you're in Poland, maybe you can help us by supporting us with our Buy Me a Coffee. It's right there on our website. And, it just will help us to, A, stay fueled because, we drink a lot of coffee around here. And it helps the show. So if you want to help us, it's out of the goodness of your heart. I can tell you that listening to the podcast to this point, you've already helped us so much. But I do have people saying, Dave, I'd love to give back something small, even just to the show. Buy me a coffee link is on our website at howtopodcast.ca. And you can support the show that way. It would mean a lot to have you on our team supporting what we do here. If you find value in the show, then that's great. Share the show, tell somebody about it. And when somebody says, Dave, I want to start a podcast, who should I check out? Oh, you should go check out the How to Podcast series because of all the great co-hosts and all the things that happen here, the meetups, everything. And I would appreciate that. And then fill her a cup once in a while if you can. But again, thank you so much for being here and supporting the How to Podcast series. Take care. Talk soon.